Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are going way beyond the surface. We're going subterranean. We're looking at the full architectural blueprint of modern influence.
Yeah, and for this, the stack of sources we've pulled together it's overwhelming. We've got everything from early 20th century media theory, the, cynical birth of PR.
All the way to hard behavior science, neuro-linguistic programming, and basically the operating manual for the entire attention economy. It's a lot.
And our mission here is really specific. We are not just summarizing these books one by one. We are treating this entire notebook, this whole sprawling data set, as if it's a single coherent document.
A meta-analysis.
Exactly, a meta-analysis to show how modern systems, both institutional and technological, are actually designed to sculpt human perception, our emotional responses, and maybe most reliably, our behavior.
We're connecting the wires. It feels like we're standing in front of a corkboard covered in red string, trying to follow the lines across decades and disciplines.
We are. And we're looking for that underlying operating system that governs how information and action are managed in public life.
And we want to be clear about our approach. We're trying to be ultra-disciplined, even when the conclusions start to feel, well, a little unsettling.
Right, so we're going to explicitly label things. We'll call out the documented facts, things that are clearly grounded in the sources.
Then the plausible inferences, which are the connections we're drawing between those facts.
And finally, the larger, maybe slightly wilder hypothesis about the whole systemic architecture that emerges when you put it all together.
Okay, so to understand the architecture, you said we need to start with the architects themselves. 3 foundational lineages.
Yes. We have to establish them first because they each represent a distinct and absolutely necessary function within this whole system of influence.
The holy trinity of persuasion, it sounds like.
In a way, yeah. First off, you have Walter Lippmann. He represents the lineage of, let's call it, epistemic control.
Epistemic control.
His work, which is rooted in the early 20th century, provided the crucial diagnosis. He's the one who mapped out the inherent cognitive vulnerabilities of the public mind, the weak spots.
So he didn't build the weapon, he just pointed out the cracks in the armor.
Precisely. He established as a fact that mass media and the public sphere were structurally incapable of delivering a true, complete picture of reality to the average, busy citizen. That diagnosis is basically the starting gun for this entire project.
Okay, so that's the first one, the diagnosis. Then you have the second lineage, which is applied consent. And the person for that is Edward Bernays.
Right. If Lippmann found the problem, Bernays created the professional strategy to exploit it.
The playbook.
Exactly. Bernays professionalized mass persuasion. He took academic psychological insights, and it didn't hurt that his uncle was Sigmund Freud, and he turned them into strategic campaigns for corporations and politicians.
So this is where the vulnerability that Lippmann identified meets a deliberate, commercially viable strategy.
Yes. And that brings us to the third pillar, which, as you said, is where this whole thing shifts from just rhetoric into the realm of hard science.
The mechanics.
The mechanics. That would be B.F. Skinner and the lineage of behavioral architecture. Skinner provided the specific mechanistic laws of reliable behavior change.
And his whole approach bypasses conscious thought, right?
Completely. It bypasses resistance entirely.
Yeah.
It focuses on scientifically designing environments. It could be a classroom, it could be a digital platform, to reliably dictate what people do. Not what they think, but what they do.
Through reinforcement.
Through schedules of reinforcement.
So let's just synthesize that. You have Lippmann's diagnosis of vulnerability, Bernays' strategic mission to manufacture desire,
Yes.
and then Skinner's reliable mechanistic method for ensuring action.
You put those 3 together and you have the complete blueprint for systemic, highly effective, and non-coercive influence.
Which is why we're not just talking about propaganda.
No, this is so much more. This is a science that integrates diagnosis, narrative management, and continuous automated behavioral reinforcement.
Okay, let's move into that first major ring of influence then, the epistemic battlefield. This is all about controlling perception itself.
And this starts right with Lippmann's analysis of the vulnerable citizen from his work like Public Opinion.
So the core fact he laid out.
Fact. Lippmann argued that news and truth are not, and often just cannot be, the same thing. And like you said before, this wasn't him blaming journalists, it was a structural problem. He recognized what he called the basic limitations of human perception. You can't see everything, you can't hear everything, you can't read everything all the time. Our reality is filtered.
But he went further, didn't he? He basically said that a democracy based on a perfectly informed public was a fantasy. a pipe dream. Why did he think the press was too fragile for that?
That's a great question. Because fact, he saw the sheer complexity of modern government as the core problem. The average citizen is busy, they're distant from events, and they are, frankly, unwilling or unable to take on the burden of daily decision-making on really complex issues.
Like trade policy or public health infrastructure.
Exactly. So what do? The citizen voluntarily delegates the responsibility for dealing with that complexity.
They expect institutions, representatives to filter it all,
Right.
to simplify it, and process these problems before they even reach the public.
Yes. They rely on what he called pictures in their heads, stereotypes, simplified narratives. Because dealing with raw, unfiltered reality is just too demanding.
And okay, here's the inference. Once that delegation happens, the system naturally shifts its focus to just managing those simplified narratives.
That's the plausible inference, yes. And that is the structural reason why the media, just by granting certain elites or institutions control over how a story is initially defined, can become what some have called the unwitting handmaidens of the powerful.
They don't even have to lie. They just have to choose how the story is presented.
Which brings us to the two key tools here, framing and priming.
Framing, so defining the criteria of judgment. It's about what details you include and, more importantly, what you leave out.
Right. And there's a lot of research, particularly from Shanta Iyengar, that shows just how powerful this is, specifically on how media frames shape who the public blames for social and political problems.
And the key distinction is between episodic and thematic framing.
Yes. Let's define those really clearly. Episodic is the individual drama.
Right, a single case study.
Right.
Like a story about one person who is unemployed.
Fact. Exactly. It presents an issue as a single event, a single person receiving aid, a single protest. Thematic framing, on the other hand, puts that issue in a much broader context.
So it would be about poverty statistics, unemployment rates, the history of social movements.
Exactly. It's the big picture versus the close-up.
And why does that distinction matter so much for manipulating who gets the blame?
Because the studies found that the framing effect is really, really nuanced. If you see an issue through an episodic frame, that one unemployed person, the tendency is to attribute responsibility to the individual.
He's unemployed because he made bad choices.
Right. But if you use a thematic frame, the tendency is to attribute responsibility to societal forces, the system, the economy. But here's the really insightful part of the research.
Okay.
Fact. Iyengar's team found that an individual's pre-existing cognitive bias, their preference for blaming an individual's character, was also a huge factor.
So some people just default to blaming the person, not the system.
Yes, but here's the kicker. That preference for blaming the person only had an impact in the thematic condition, not the episodic one.
Wait, that's counterintuitive. Why?
It is, and here's the plausible inference. If you want to steer public opinion towards individual blame, which almost always favors the status quo because it doesn't require systemic change,
You just flood the zone with episodic frames.
you flood the zone with individual stories of failure or tragedy or heroism, and you dilute the thematic, structural context. By doing that, you confirm the individual's pre-existing bias against thinking about systemic change. The frame acts as a selection mechanism. It optimizes for the kind of blame you want.
That is a powerful, subtle mechanism. The structure of the news optimizes our blame assignment.
And then you have priming, which is even more subtle. It's not about what we think, but how we think about it when we make a judgment.
So it's about influencing the criteria we use.
Fact. Exactly. The media makes certain information, certain criteria, more accessible in our minds just through repetition. Let's say a political campaign is covered over and over again through the lens of one candidate's supposed integrity issues.
Like corruption or an affair or something.
Right. That constant coverage primes the public to prioritize trustworthiness or honesty above all other issues when they go to vote. It makes them hypersensitive to that one specific thing, regardless of what the candidate's actual policy proposals are.
So the media doesn't have to tell me who to vote for. They just have to tell me what matters when I decide.
They define the metrics of success or failure. And if you take this whole sophisticated system, exploiting Lippmann's vulnerabilities with these tools, and you scale it up, you arrive at the systemic critique offered by Chomsky and Herman.
The propaganda model.
The propaganda model.
Which takes media bias from being sort of an accidental frailty to being an inevitable structural machine.
Fact. The model argues for a systematic and highly political dichotomization in news coverage. And that split is based entirely on whether the story serves the interests of important domestic power players.
And it's not some grand conspiracy in a smoke-filled room. It's the inevitable result of these structural filters that just pre-sort what news even gets through.
Right. We should detail those filters because they are the hard evidence of the system.
Let's do it. Filter number 1 is ownership.
Media giants are huge, profit-seeking corporations. They're owned by wealthy elites with hands in all sorts of other industries. So their own self-interest dictates that they're not going to run coverage that upsets their broader financial interests or their allies.
Which leads right into filter number 2, advertising.
Fact. Mass media cannot survive without ad revenue. So if a news outlet consistently publishes stories that are critical of a major advertiser or critical of the capitalist system itself,
they risk losing that revenue.
They do. So advertisers act as a kind of licensing authority, effectively deciding which media outlets get to stay in business.
The third filter is about sourcing.
Media outlets need to fill a ton of airtime in column inches, and they need to do it cheaply. So they rely very heavily on official sources.
Government press conferences, corporate PR departments, think tanks.
Exactly. These sources provide predictable, reliable, and cheap content. And the plausible inference is that this dependence creates a symbiotic relationship where journalists just naturally adopt the narrative frames that are established by those powerful institutions.
And then there's the enforcement mechanism, the deterrent, FLAC.
Fact. FLAC refers to any negative response, criticism, lawsuits, organized complaints that are aimed at disciplining any media outlet that strays too far outside the consensus.
And this is often organized by powerful groups who just monitor the media. It's a way to encourage self-censorship.
It is. And finally, you have the ideological filter. Historically, it was anti-communism.
And now it's more like anti-terrorism or some other designated enemy.
Fact, yes. It's the underlying ideology that's used to mobilize the public and to delegitimize any kind of dissent. Anyone who challenges the core assumptions of the system can be smeared as disloyal or an extremist or aligned with that enemy.
It simplifies everything into a good versus evil story.
Which makes that dichotomization in news coverage inevitable. You get words like murderous for the enemy versus a tragedy when it's a result of our actions.
That example from the Indochina War in the sources is just devastating. It shows the system in action. Journalists using intensely emotional words, savage, brutal, for enemy actions.
While describing the massive civilian casualties from U.S. firepower as just a tragedy of war, the language, the attribution of blame, it was all systematically weighted to serve political ends. It proves the filters work, regardless of what any individual journalist intended.
That clarity on systemic bias is the perfect segue into Ring 2, engineering, belief, and consent. So if Lippmann gave us the map of vulnerability and Chomsky and Herman described the flow of the river,
then Edward Bernays and the other PR pioneers were the ones who taught institutions how to build dams and canals to actively manage that flow for profit and power.
Bernays really is the bridge here. He connects Freudian psychology directly to mass commercial influence.
He does. In fact, his core philosophy, which he laid out in books like Propaganda, was chillingly direct. He said, the conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society.
And who are these manipulators?
He called them the invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country. And he didn't even see this as evil, he saw it as necessary. He argued that in a complex mass society, you need to manage people's expectations and beliefs just to make the system function smoothly.
And this is where we see that crucial economic shift we talked about. The move from appealing to people's needs, you need a pair of shoes, to actively manufacturing desire.
You need a specific brand of shoes to feel a specific way.
Right. And that plausible inference is that this shift was essential for moving to a consumption-based economy. You can't have constant mass consumption if people are satisfied with what they have.
You have to continuously manufacture dissatisfaction. And to do that, you need psychoanalysis.
Let's get into the Torches of Freedom campaign. It's the ultimate case study of this.
It is. So, fact, Bernays was hired by the American Tobacco Company to break the social taboo against women smoking in public. A huge taboo at the time.
And he knew he couldn't just run ads saying, hey ladies, smoke her cigarettes. It wouldn't work against those deep social norms.
No. He needed to link the product to a deeper, unconscious, emotional desire.
So he brings in a psychoanalyst, Dr. A.A. Brill.
Yes, a student of his uncle Freud. And Brill gives him the clinical interpretation. Women's desire to smoke was a manifestation of their unconscious desire to challenge male power. He literally equated the cigarette with the penis.
So smoking becomes an act of phallic assertion, a symbolic grab for power and equality.
It's unbelievable, but yes. So Bernays didn't advertise the cigarette, he advertised emotional emancipation.
He organized that huge public stunt during the 1929 Easter Sunday parade.
Fact. He hired a group of debutantes to march in the parade and on his signal all light up their torches of freedom. He framed the entire action in the press as an act of female liberation.
So buying a pack of cigarettes was no longer just a personal habit. It was a political statement. The product became a symbol. It was given a psychological utility that was engineered from the start.
And he did the same thing with the color green for Lucky Strike cigarettes. He couldn't change the package color, so he hired psychologists to lecture fashion editors on the psychological importance of the color green and manufactured a fashion trend.
He changed the world to match the product.
He did. And this professionalization also included targeting group leaders. This is another key technique.
This is basically putting the two-step flow of communication theory into practice.
Fact, yes. The theory from Lazarsfeld and Katz said that ideas flow from mass media to opinion leaders, and then from them to the wider population. Bernays consciously targeted those leaders, knowing their word-of-mouth influence would do the heavy lifting for him.
But the architecture of modern PR isn't just about Bernays' manipulation. There's also the shift pioneered by Ivy Lee.
Great, managed transparency.
Which is a great phrase.
Fact, Lee is the one credited with shifting institutions away from just outright denial when a crisis hits. He advocated for providing a full and frank story. But the goal was always to manage the crisis, not necessarily to reveal the unvarnished truth.
And the definitive example of this is the Ludlow Massacre.
Fact. In 1914, the Rockefeller family's militia attacked and killed striking miners and their families in Colorado. It was a PR disaster of epic proportions, a huge ethical failure.
And Lee's strategy wasn't to deny it.
No. His strategy was a massive long-term campaign to rehabilitate John D. Rockefeller's public image. He started promoting Rockefeller's philanthropy, staged photo ops of him interacting with workers,
and famously started the tradition of Rockefeller handing out shiny new dimes to the public.
He traded a catastrophic ethical failure for a carefully crafted public image of benevolence. And the plausible inference here is that the persistence of spin today, even with the social media, it all follows Lee's blueprint. The channels have changed, but the goal is the same.
Aligning the corporation's character with public perception.
It's all about interpretation, making sure the company's actions are interpreted vividly and truly, as they say, through every single avenue that leads to public opinion. The architecture of consent is about making the internal mission and the external story match, whether they really do or not.
Okay, now we hit the deep synthesis. This is where we connect all the wires. We've got Lippmann's cognitive vulnerability, we've got Bernays and Lee's strategic narrative management, but now we get to the mechanical foundation of the whole system, the Skinnerian shift.
This is the critical pivot. The whole focus moves from changing what people think, which is messy and unreliable.
People resist.
They resist. The focus shifts to scientifically designing the environment to dictate what people do. The goal is to bypass conscious thought entirely and just rely on predictable scientific law.
And the core mechanism Skinner gave us is operant conditioning.
Fact. The principle is incredibly simple, but it is profoundly reliable. Behavior is controlled by its consequences, specifically through schedules of reinforcement.
If a behavior is followed by a reward, you're more likely to do it again. If it's followed by a punishment, you're less likely.
That's it. And this principle perfectly explains that gap between what we say we value and what we actually do.
We say we want to read Tolstoy, but we spend 4 hours doom scrolling on our phones.
Fact. Exactly. Because our behavior is governed by the direct, immediate contingencies of reinforcement, which are so much more powerful than some abstract rule you tell yourself. The rule, read Tolstoy, it's good for you, has no chance against the immediate variable reinforcement schedule coming from your phone.
And you mentioned the schedule, the reinforcement. Let's talk about that because that's what makes the behavior so compulsive, the slot machine effect.
That's the one, the variable ratio schedule. Fact. This schedule delivers a reward, a win, a notification, alike after an unpredictable number of responses. This unpredictability produces really high, sustained rates of action, and it makes the behavior extremely hard to extinguish.
Is more powerful than a fixed schedule where the reward is predictable.
Much more powerful, and the plausible inference is obvious. Modern platforms are built on variable ratio schedules. You never know which swipe or which refresh is going to deliver that little dopamine hit of interesting content. It's designed to maximize continuous action.
And Skinner saw this as the foundation for a whole society, right? In books like Walden 2.
Fact. He did. Walden 2 was his proposal to apply this science of behavior to designing an entire culture. The managers, who he called cultural engineers, would make sure that men were adequate for group living by changing their behavior through environmental design.
Not by trusting in some flawed concept like innate goodness or evil.
No, the goal was to maximize human achievement and reduce bad outcomes through pure scientific management of the environment.
That's the tension, isn't it? The environment is managed to make you choose the pre-approved path, which effectively removes the need for your own moral decision-making or discipline.
And that brings us to the big hypothesis, the architectural fusion of our three guys.
Let's hear it.
If Lippmann defined the public's cognitive vulnerability, and Bernays established the strategic value of manipulating desire to get consent,
then Skinner provided the reliable, mechanistic method, the continuous feedback loop that ensures the desired action is actually taken.
the system no longer relies on just convincing you with an ad in a newspaper. It relies on building a world where the most reinforced path is the only one you naturally want to follow.
So the big hypothesis is that this convergence has created a soft, data-driven behavior laboratory that runs across all of society.
It's a lab where external control mechanisms, digital platforms, government nudges generate predictable outcomes by maximizing metrics like engagement or stability. It's all designed to make you choose their desired path without needing a soldier with a gun. It's about maximizing compliance over autonomy.
Okay, to really understand how this works on an individual level, we have to get into the toolkit. The most precise, intimate mechanisms of influence. This is the behavioral toolkit from NLP and Ericksonian hypnosis.
This is the operational language of how the mind actually processes reality. Neuro-Linguistic Programming, NLP, it started with a concept called modeling.
Right, the systematic study of the structure of subjective experience.
Fact. Exactly. Researchers like Bandler and Grinder, they modeled successful people, expert therapists, negotiators, communicators to create an explicit, learnable model of what they did inside their own heads. It's reverse engineering human excellence.
So if a salesperson can close any deal, NLP wants to map the exact internal sequence of thoughts and feelings that leads to that success so it can be replicated.
Precisely. And a key insight is that our experiences are made up of representational systems, visual, auditory, kinesthetic, and so on. But the real currency of change, the control panel, lies in what they call the submodalities.
That's a very technical term. Let's unpack that. What are submodalities and why are they the currency?
Fact. Submodalities are the detailed sensory qualities of any internal thought. So if you visualize a memory, the submodalities are its color, its size, its brightness, its location in your mental space, its distance.
And if you hear an internal voice, it's the volume, the tone, the tempo.
Yes, they are the parameters of your internal mental architecture.
And they matter, because if you change them, you change the emotional feeling attached to the thought.
You do. Fact. You can neutralize a negative feeling or amplify motivation just by manipulating these qualities without even changing the content of the memory. Think about a compulsion, like a craving for junk food.
Oh.
When you think of that food, that internal image in your mind is probably big, bright, close up, maybe even moving. It feels urgent.
That's compelling.
So the plausible inference is, what if you consciously use these mental tools? What if you take that image and you mentally shrink it down to the size of a postage stamp, turn it to black and white, and push it far away into the distance?
The emotional urgency, the charge, would just dissipate.
It does. You interrupt the compulsion loop. You're applying the behavioral mechanism internally to your own mind.
And this leads to understanding a behavioral strategy, the sequence of these internal steps.
Fact. A strategy is an ordered sequence, a specific syntax of these internal and external experiences that consistently produces a behavior. A good spelling strategy, for instance, might be see the word visually, then hear it sounded out auditorily, then feel the urge to write it kinetically. VAK, the order is critical.
So if someone's a bad speller, their internal strategy might be out of order.
Their strategy might be AKV, which fails to retrieve the visual memory needed. So the goal is to identify a faulty sequence and install a better one. It's pure mental reverse engineering.
Which is a perfect pivot to communication to Milton Erickson and his techniques of indirect communication, the Milton model.
Erickson was a genius at communicating with the unconscious mind. He found ways to bypass the conscious, critical part of you that usually resists suggestion.
How did he get past that filter?
Through artful vagueness, fact, Erickson used language patterns, generalizations, deletions, ambiguous words that don't give the conscious mind enough specific information to argue with.
So what happens?
The listener's unconscious mind is forced to initiate what's called a transderivational search.
Okay, wait, a transderivational search. That sounds like a military operation. What is the mind searching for?
It's searching through all of your own stored memories and experiences to fill in the missing meaning in the vague statement. And the plausible inference is that because the meaning feels like you generated it yourself.
It came from inside me.
Right, it came from your own database, so the suggestion meets almost zero resistance. You feel like the insight was yours, even though the hypnotist just provided the empty framework.
That's an incredibly powerful technique for getting consent without a fight.
And this leads to his core mechanism, pacing and leading, fact. Pacing is where you describe the other person's verifiable current reality. You're sitting in that chair, you can hear the sound of my voice, you're breathing in and out.
You're just stating facts. It builds rapport and trust because you can't disagree.
Exactly. You pace their reality, and once that rapport is established, you have their unconscious permission to introduce the lead.
The new idea, the suggestion.
The new behavior you want them to adopt. And you can utilize anything they give you. If a patient is fidgeting, Erickson would say, and as you continue to feel that need to move your left hand, that's the pace.
And then the lead.
You can begin to notice that the change you came here for is already beginning.
Yeah.
He connects their behavior to his desired outcome.
As Erickson himself said, he could compel a patient to make a free, spontaneous choice without them even knowing they were being directed.
Yes. And finally, the most profound manipulation of subjective reality, time distortion.
Fact. Erickson documented that people in a trance state can perceive time completely differently.
And this has massive implications. A person could hallucinate practicing a skill like playing the piano for what feels like hours, but only minutes have passed on the clock. It allows for incredible accelerated learning.
Or you could do the reverse. You could make a long, painful recovery from surgery feel like it happened in an instant.
The architecture of influence literally includes the ability to edit the subjective experience of time. That is so far beyond simple advertising.
Okay, so if those were the psychological blueprints, this next section is the construction of the building itself, the technological nexus. This is where data, platforms, and algorithms automate and scale all these tactics. This is the Skinnerian lab becoming a global reality.
This is the fusion. Fact. The sources are clear. Modern apps are not benign tools. They are engineered to be maximally addicting. Entire teams of people use the hooked model trigger, action, variable reward, investment to create these continuous behavioral loops.
And this is where we see the dark patterns. They're leveraging the exact psychological vulnerabilities that Bernays and Skinner identified decades ago.
Fact. Dark patterns are just deceptive design tactics. They're meant to manipulate you into making choices that benefit the company, not you. It's leveraging the system architecture over your own clear consent.
Let's run through a few of the most common ones.
Okay, first you have sneaking. This is when hidden fees or unwanted items suddenly appear late in the checkout process. It relies on your cognitive fatigue and the sunk cost of the time you've already invested.
Then there's forced continuity.
The classic free trial that automatically converts to a paid subscription. It just banks on your inertia, on you forgetting to cancel.
And the third one, which uses that Bernays-style emotional manipulation.
Confirm shaming. This is where the choice to decline something is framed in morally loaded language to make you feel guilty or stupid.
Like the, yes, I want to save 20% button versus the tiny, no, I prefer to be an idiot and pay full price link.
Exactly. And the plausible inference is that these aren't design mistakes. They are engineered consequences designed to reinforce platform engagement and corporate revenue through constant, subtle punishment and reward.
And the automation of this just accelerates the danger. Kevin Mitnick, the famous hacker, he described how social engineering used to require a human manipulator.
Right, pretending to be someone else on the phone to trick an employee into giving up a password.
Now that human flaw is being mechanized.
Fact. In the cybersecurity world, that manual approach is completely obsolete. Attackers now use automated scanning and machine learning to weaponize newly discovered security flaws within hours, not days, hours. The speed of the attack matches the speed of the digital world.
And the inference here is what connects the whole architecture. The principles of influence that once required a team of human PR experts are now automated, personalized, and constantly learning at machine speed.
This creates the hypothesis of the truly continuous behavior laboratory. Influence campaigns aren't just one-off ad blitzes anymore. They operate on a digital architecture where the algorithms are optimizing for engagement, which is a pure Skinnerian metric, while also amplifying the elite narratives that Lippmann and Chomsky talked about.
And it creates this feedback loop that just continually optimizes for the system's goals. It might maximize polarization or distraction simply because those behaviors drive the most engagement.
The system doesn't care about the outcome for society. It only cares about optimizing the metric.
So scaling all the way out, we have to look at the macro-level ramifications of this whole fused architecture, especially how it intersects with state power.
Marshall McLuhan made that chilling observation that total war has evolved into information war.
Fact. He argued the Cold War wasn't primarily fought with bombs, but with information, requiring the constant involvement of everyone, everywhere. The real battlefield is perception. The civilian population is the front line.
And we have historical proof that state entities have been deeply invested in testing the limits of human programmability, trying to make Skinner's vision a reality.
The CIA projects, Bluebird, Artichoke, and the infamous MKULTRA.
Fact. These projects were explicitly designed to develop techniques to manage and control the minds of the American people. The internal memos literally ask if a man can be programmed like a machine. They hired social scientists, psychiatrists, everyone, to advise them on psychological warfare.
And the findings from some of this research are just deeply unsettling because they validate the core mechanical premise of this whole behavioral architecture.
Take MKULTRA Subproject 119. Fact. The experiments involved the remote electronic stimulation of a patient's brain. They could reliably induce specific emotional states, relaxation or aggression, with an external signal, without the subject's conscious knowledge.
And they found that while in that state of induced relaxation, they could convince the subject to agree to major brain surgery.
Yes, and as soon as they turned the stimulation off, the very idea of the surgery enraged him.
That's beyond persuasion. It's not even hypnosis. That is reliable, external, biological redirection of choice that just overrides your conscious will.
It proves that influence doesn't have to be rhetorical. It can be purely mechanistic. And the plausible inference is that when you combine narrative control, psychological manipulation, and algorithmic reinforcement, the entire system just naturally optimizes for its own goals.
Goals like engagement, risk management, and above all else, stability.
Yes, and we see the cultural shifts that are just side effects of this optimization all around us.
Give us a real-world example.
Okay, take the modern workplace. Fact. We're seeing forecasts that these mandatory return-to-office mandates aren't really just about productivity. They are structural pressures that are reshaping employee expectations.
They maximize institutional control over individual autonomy.
Right. These mandates are often imposed without the flexibility that workers now expect. And the plausible inference is that the behavioral outcome is predictable. Working mothers, for example, are losing ground in the labor market as these mandates get stricter and childcare costs go up.
The system optimizes for its goal in office presence, easier surveillance, and the cultural shift, like squeezing a certain demographic out of the workforce, is just collateral damage.
The behavior is dictated by the design of the environment. Or look at political polarization. The algorithm's goal is engagement. Extreme, emotionally charged content gets the most engagement. That's a Skinnerian reinforcement.
So the resulting cultural landscape is predictable. Fragmentation, tribalism.
The systems don't care if the result is a stable society or a polarized one. That's secondary to the immediate goal of continuous engagement. The behavioral landscape is just the measurable byproduct of an architecture designed for commercial and institutional ends, not for human flourishing.
Okay. This entire synthesis, from Lippmann all the way to the digital overlay, it paints a picture that is, by design, unsettling. It feels total. But the whole point of this deep dive is to turn that knowledge of the architecture into tools for autonomy. We have to move from pattern recognition to psychic self-defense.
Absolutely. The power of these systems lies in their invisibility. They operate beneath the radar of your conscious thought. But once you can name the patterns, you can recognize them, and recognition is the first step to interrupting them.
So let's provide 3 essential mental filters for you, the listener, grounded directly in this architecture we've just mapped out. The first one comes from Skinner. It's a reinforcement filter.
When you're using any platform, any app, or even just seeing an ad, you have to ask yourself, what behavior is this system rewarding in me right now, and why? You need to identify that reinforcing consequence, the variable reward, the validation, that quick hit of information.
And on the follow-up question,
is this feedback loop driving me toward my goal like autonomy or knowledge, or is it driving me toward the system's goal of maximizing my engagement and extracting my data? Interrogating that reinforcement schedule is how you break the conditioning.
Okay, filter number 2. This one integrates Lippmann's analysis and Bernays' use of framing. This is the frame filter. It's crucial for navigating that epistemic battlefield.
When you're consuming news or any big narrative, ask yourself, if this story were a carefully designed lab experiment, what variable would they be isolating and testing on me? And, more practically, who define the choices I'm being given and who benefits if I accept the options that are provided by this specific frame?
If the news is all episodic, you demand the thematic context. If they're priming you to judge on one criterion, you consciously ask about others.
You have to look at the structure of the presentation, not just the content.
And finally, a filter from the Behavioral Toolkit, from NLP and Submodalities. For when you feel that psychological pull, that compulsion, this is the internal strategy filter.
When you feel yourself being driven by a strong, unwanted urge anxiety, a craving, you have to ask, how am I internally representing this problem in my mind? If that internal image is big, bright, close, and loud, you have just identified the submodalities that are generating that emotional charge.
And then you can consciously use the tools.
Can you shrink it? Can you turn down the volume? Can you push it far away? Can you run that mental movie backward? You have the instruction manual for the currency of your own mind. You have to use it to change the charge.
And that realization is the deepest dive of all. If you can model and replicate these so-called magical skills of influence and behavior change from the sources, if you can understand the syntax that governs your own actions, then the ultimate architecture to control is your own mind.
And the provocative thought we want to leave you with is this. All of these systems, from PR campaigns to digital algorithms, they thrive on you delegating your sovereignty. They want you to voluntarily surrender the heavy burden of conscious thought in exchange for stability, predictability.
But the moment you understand that the choice of who holds the instruction manual for your attention, your feelings, and your behavior is a conscious one,
the entire architecture shifts.
it's time to decide who holds the manual.